Awesome. So this presentation is about ACTUP New York. And I just want to start with a brief description of why I chose this topic to kickstart. It was on our list, but I sort of plopped it in for January. So for those of you not familiar, ACTUP is self-described as a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis. We advise and inform, we demonstrate, we are not silent. So they're an activist group, and they began in March 1987 as a response to the AIDS crisis. Today we understand that AIDS is a late stage of HIV infection that occurs when the body's immune system is badly damaged because of the virus. And according to HIV.gov, without HIV medicine, people with AIDS typically survive about 3 years. Once someone has a dangerous, opportunistic illness, life expectancy without treatment falls to about 1 year. HIV medicine can still help people at this stage of HIV infection, and it can even be life-saving. But people who start HIV medicine soon after they get HIV experience more benefits. That's why HIV testing is so important. So ACT UP New York and chapters around the country were responding to a situation that was deadly. They were facing down misinformation, hatred, ostracization, and dehumanization. And I'm referencing my notes a lot, so I apologize. I'm gonna be, some of it is gonna be, I'm gonna be reading, and then some of it will be a little bit less formal. But according to Sarah Schulman, historicizing ACT UP as an organizational nexus of a larger culture of resistance by people with AIDS invites all of us in the present to imagine ourselves as potentially effective activists and supporters, no matter who we are. The story of ACT UP New York is much larger than its legendary Monday night meetings. It is a political and emotional history of liaisons, associations, relationships, coalitions, and influences that cumulatively create a crucial reality of successfully transformative struggle under the most dire of circumstances. So with that in mind, I kind of felt like, dire circumstances sounds very familiar right now. So I thought it was good to look at this activist organization and all that they've done. Some brief content warnings. There will be some discussion of drug use and addiction, depictions of grief, death, and loss, and depictions of some police violence and arrests. So keep that in mind, and if anyone needs to leave the presentation, that's okay. All right, just a brief outline. I'm going to start by setting up the stage for the historical setting of what came before ACT UP, and then ACT UP's founding, what a typical meeting was like, as well as the group membership. And then the majority will be discussing some of the major actions and their impacts, and then a little bit about ACT UP today. So,
I was gonna try to minimize the Zoom box, but the mouse seems to not let me.
Oh, weird.
On this.
Oh,
yeah, no.
That's okay.
Will do.
Just imagine you can read what's under it.
Okay. So starting out June 1969, the Stonewall riots. I'm not going to go too much in detail on this. I'm just going to kind of list some of these. Roe v. Wade legalizes abortion in 1973. Same year, Lambda Legal is founded, which is important because several activists from ACT UP came from this civil rights organization. And then increasingly later on, it's kind of interesting because Lambda Legal would often not accept cases from ACT UP. So there was some conflict, as things shifted. 1978 was New York's sterilization regulations. Informed consent for sterilization. So that was important because after that, there was more protection for people to be informed about whether or not they would be sterilized. You know, sometimes doctors would do that without the patient's consent or knowledge. And so that was an important milestone. 1979 was the Hyde Amendment upheld by the Supreme Court. And the Hyde Amendment is a legislative provision which bars funds for abortion. And throughout the history of ACTUP, the issue of abortion and women's health issues and other things, they all kind of commingle at different points. So, and then 1986, Bowers v. Hardwick Supreme Court decision reinforced the criminalization of gay sex. It was a 5-4 ruling, and it upheld Georgia's sodomy laws, maintaining gay sex in a private home between consenting adults was illegal. So that brings us to these two important milestones. Going back just a little bit, in July 1981, we see this New York Times headline, rare cancer seen in 41 homosexuals. And this was, for many, the first time that they had heard of what would be called AIDS. And then the second image is the silence equals death image. And this was designed in January, February 1987 by the Silence Equals Death Collective. And this is such a ubiquitous image. This was just before the beginning of ACTUP, but this was used heavily, so that's an important milestone. Between these 2 years, that's obviously a large span of time with a crisis, and over 40,000 people died of AIDS in the United States between 1981 and 1987. During this crucial first years, Ronald Reagan never said the word AIDS. And so there was a lot stemming from a lot of anger, a lot of grief and heavy emotions that sort of culminated in the founding of ACTUP, which a lot of people say the sort of milestone date is March 10th, 1987, when Larry Kramer gave his speech at the Gay Center on West 13th Street, calling for a political response to AIDS. And the famous quote is sort of mixed sometimes, but I've quoted it here as, "In 5 years, half of you will be dead." 2 days after this speech, 300 people met at the same gay center and formed ACTUP. So this is viewed as sort of a starting point. It's important to note that ACTUP is not synonymous with Larry Kramer. A lot of times, if you are reading about things from certain perspectives, you'll see Larry Kramer's ACTUP, or he'll sort of be conflated with the founding of that. His influence on many is very clear. He was a controversial figure, however, even within the movement, and he was not present for everything. This is a broad network of coalitions, even in the New York chapter. So, however, he was also a rich gay man with a lot of influence, political connections, and he was very vocal and made demands on his relationships and used that currency to call for change. And so that's very important to note that this is a important date. Going forward, it's also important to note that ACTUP's history is better understood as a lot of things happening simultaneously. We can put dates on things like the speech, but a lot of actions occurred over the course of days, weeks, even years sometimes. And so we have to sort of acknowledge that that energy was building across those actions. All right. So a typical ACTUP meeting. Regular meetings were Monday night, every week from 7 to 11 p.m. That's a long meeting. And meeting every week is I don't know, it's a different vibe in the city, I think, and there's attendance is obviously going to play a factor in that. It was held in room 101 of the LGBT Center. The name changed throughout the years. It was originally just the Gay Center, the LGBT Center, and I think now it might be, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if they're meeting in the same place. I'd have to look that up. Yeah, they might have moved. But that's not super important. They followed Robert's Rules of Order, but as they called it, they called it Roberta's Rules of Order. It's very important, like as somber as a lot of their the topics that they were dealing with were and the actions that they were doing. Humor is so important, and you'll see in some of the clips there's like moments where there's a little bit of laughter, and it was a vibrant place to be when you're at these meetings. They were run by teams of facilitators elected every 6 months, and they had an agenda before the meeting, but it was usually altered either right before or during the meeting as we went along. Generally, they had reports, and then they would discuss proposed actions and events, and then move into sort of breaking out. And then they also had information related to AIDS on a table, usually at the entrance or somewhere. So I thought we'd take a look at a little bit of footage. I'm going to use clips from a documentary called United in Anger. And yeah, whenever you're ready, Columbo, let's take a look at that. You might have to control click. Oh, I'm not sure. I heard it.
Yeah, it's doing that thing where it doesn't show up on the
in my browser. Oh, I wonder.
Well, Columbus, the meetings do still take place at the LGBT Center on 13th Street in Manhattan when they're not on Zoom.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Thanks for that quick Google.
Yeah, so we can stop in whenever, every Monday when it's not on Zoom.
From 7 to 11 p.m.
That's right. Get ready for a zap. I thought maybe they, oh, there it is.
Oh.
Just navigating two screens, that's all.
And
Thank you.
it goes to 125.
2549, somewhere around there.
If there are any on-duty, off-duty, closeted, undercover police officers or federal agents in this room, you're required by certain laws that we know about to identify yourself at this time.
Don't do it! They never do it!
They never do it. Why? You're such a friendly group of people. I don't understand.
ACTUP was not one monolithic institution. It was a group of people who met every Monday night, and many of them were parts of smaller groups or cells or affinity groups within the larger group, and those affinity groups to some extent had, if not a separate life, a life outside the group. So it was much more molecular in structure.
We're the Awning Leapers. We're from ACTUP New York.
Hi, we're Wave 3 of ACTUP New York.
Hi, I'm James Shapiro, and I'm representing AIDA, Anger into Direct Action.
Everything about ACTUP was so brilliant organizationally, and it was brilliant because it was organic and it came out of necessity. And the affinity groups were pure necessity, because ACTUP always wanted the freshness of irreverence. And irreverence can't come from consensus. And the affinity groups allowed for small groups of like-minded people to do whatever they wanted.
We're the Isolations from ACTUP Chicago. We're with the Power Tools, and we're the group that shut down the New York Stock Exchange.
I'm Maxine again, and I'm Linda. And I'm from the Coast Affinity Group in New York.
So the idea of affinity groups was from the civil rights movement and also from the women's movement. And the whole idea was that when you get trained to do civil disobedience, that you have to, you break down the group into smaller groups so that you sort of know everybody and everybody knows you, and you can support each other in a very specific kind of way.
We're the Invisible Women. We're from ACTUP New York.
I want to announce the first ever in the history of the AIDS activist movement, an affinity group for people dedicated to alternative and holistic treatments. We're called the non-toxics.
We are Los Locas Radicales and WAR, which is WAR is wipe out AIDS and racism.
Affinity groups within ACTUP, if they worked, when they worked, for their lifetime, could be almost like these close-knit communities. But if an affinity group did something that put your bodies on the line, risked arrest, and sometimes actually did arrest, I'll speak at least for myself, my fear level was always very high, and I don't know if I could have done it without a group of people within which I felt close to. I'd seen in similar situations, lots, trusted, liked, and several of them loved. Some of them are people I was as close to as any people I've been to in my life.
We really began to talk about civil disobedience as a safe tactic for making a stronger statement and as a way of getting media attention. For civil disobedience, I think it's absolutely critical to do an affinity group structure for safety.
Again, locking arms. It's painful, and that force of resistance that you're providing can be used against you.
We really talked about trying to get everybody in the group trained for civil disobedience, because you don't always know when it's going to happen or when you're going to want to do it.
That one. Okay.
Thank you.
Oops.
Yeah.
Try it. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So, and we saw a little bit of the end there, some of the civil disobedience training. So, and I think, because we were talking before, I think they still do that. So that would be interesting to do. So some of the about the membership of ACTUP. So I'll just read what I have there. Some of the most effective members had little or no relationships to AIDS when they first joined the organization. They were a broad coalition of activists, scientists, medical personnel, journalists, and social workers. At the height, meetings ranged from 500 to 800 people, and their largest demonstration had 7,000 people, and that was Stop the Church. I want to just read another quote from Sarah Schulman's book, which I did helped me a lot with my research, and I would highly recommend. It's called Let the Record Show. She writes, while many people joined ACTUP New York to end their own suffering, others came to confront someone else's pain. ACTUP was simultaneously a place of decline and a place of defiance of loss. They came to save lives with humor, commitment, profound innovation, genius, will, and focus, and sometimes wild acting out, ruthlessness, and chance. But that means that they also came to die and to watch disintegration. Because to make something better, we have to face it at its worst. And only a small group of people on this earth are willing to look pain in its real face, assess it accurately, cooperate, and rise to the occasion to solve a problem. People who are desperate are much more effective than people who have time to waste. And then she also, while trying to find a common characteristic of the membership, which was a big struggle for her, she came to the realization that What all these ACT-UPers had in common was not experiential. There was no common concrete factor in their lived lives. Rather, it was characterological. These were people who were unable to sit out a historic cataclysm. They were driven by nature, by practice, or by some combination thereof to defend people in trouble through standing with them. What ACT-UPers had in common was that regardless of demographic, they were a very specific type of person, necessary to historical paradigm shifts. In case of emergency, they were not bystanders. So, with that in mind, I'd like to move on to some of the major actions of the at the time. So I'm gonna go through them one by one, but that's an overview of the list. The first is First Wall Street, and they called it First Wall Street because they demonstrated there multiple times. So if you look at this date is March 24th, 1987, and this is 2 weeks after the founding of ACT UP. And approximately 250 demonstrators gathered in front of Trinity Church, and they had 7 demands, which were immediate release of federal Food and Drug Administration, by the Food and Drug Administration of drugs that might help save their lives, and they listed the drugs. Immediate abolishment of cruel double-blind studies, wherein some get the new drugs and some don't. Immediate release of these drugs to everyone with AIDS or ARC. Immediate availability of these drugs at affordable prices. Curb your greed. Immediate massive public education to stop the spread of AIDS. Immediate policy to prohibit discrimination in AIDS treatment, insurance, employment, and housing. Immediate establishment of a coordinated, comprehensive, and compassionate national policy on AIDS. And then at the bottom of their announcement, I was gonna try and include it, but I don't think I did on the next slide. But at the bottom of the announcement, it read, President Reagan, nobody is in charge. AIDS is the biggest killer in New York City of young men and women. Tell your friends, spread the word, come protest together. 7 a.m., March 24, you must be on time. AIDS is everyone's business now. So this is 2 weeks after the founding, and they got 250 people. And here's a write-up in the New York Times, homosexuals arrested at AIDS drug protest. And 17 were arrested for civil disobedience after crossing barricades to block the traffic. Okay. The next action I'll discuss is seize control of the FDA. So this is October 11th, 1988. And this is an example of choosing the right target. One of the tactics that was so important with this is that demonstrating in front of the FDA was not on anyone's radar at the time. Usually demonstrations happened at the White House or at a Capitol building or somewhere like that. Going right to the FDA was not the typical action. So they wanted to sort of get right to the root of what organization was making the decisions affecting people. This was their first national mobilization and first major victory. They called their national organization ACT NY, a AIDS coalition to network, organize, and win. And they organized mostly via telephone and conference call. So they had some, there was some, I think a group took a trip to San Francisco at one point, so there was some in person, but that was mostly done over the telephone. And approximately 1,500 activists from around the US descended on the headquarters of the Food and Drug Administration to demand that the FDA speed up the research and sort of have its similar demands to the Wall Street action. Before the demonstration, the day before, they had an action in front of the Health and Human Services. And Vito Russo gave a version of his famous speech, Why We Fight. Hopefully me reading from my notes isn't too tedious, but I'd like to read a little bit of his speech because it is very powerful. I did put a link as well to a video if folks want to watch the whole thing. So he says, a friend of mine in New York City has a half fare transit card, which means that you get on buses and subways for half price. And the other day, when he showed his card to the token attendant, the attendant asked what his disability was, and he said, I have AIDS. And the attendant says, no, you don't. If you have AIDS, you'd be home dying. And so I wanted to speak out today as a person with AIDS who is not dying. You know, for the last 3 years since I was diagnosed, my family thinks two things about my situation. One, they think I'm going to die, and two, they think that my government is doing absolutely everything in their power to stop that. And they're wrong on both counts. So if I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from homophobia. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from racism. If I'm dying from anything, it's from indifference and red tape, because these are the things that are preventing an end to this crisis. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from Jesse Helms. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the President of the United States. And especially if I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the sensationalism of newspapers and magazines and television shows, which are interested in me as a human interest story, only as long as I'm willing to be a helpless victim. But not if I'm fighting for my life. If I'm dying from anything, I'm dying from the fact that not enough rich, white, heterosexual men have gotten AIDS for anybody to give a shit. It goes on. And like I said, I put a link there. Hopefully we can send this since we're recording it. We'll figure out a way to include the links. This was also, they used marshals during this demonstration, which were essentially crowd control, identified with an armband. They had a policy of, trying to think, I think it's, so 75 marshals for every 400 people at the demonstration was their calculation. That's how they decided. This is also an example of the inside-outside approach, which increasingly became part of their action approach. It's a strategy of having one arm of the movement in direct personal relationship with government or the officials, corporate officials, while at the same time providing pressure from street actions, civil disobedience, and direct action. So it's sort of like, we'll come to the table with you, but we're also going to have people outside demonstrating. So that ramped up the pressure to act. The next action, major action, was the New York Stock Exchange. This was a push to lower the price of AZT, which at the time was costing people $10,000 a year. AZT was previously a cancer drug. It wasn't working. When they were looking for something to go into to research for AIDS, they went to AZT, and it became the highest profit-making pharmaceutical in the world at the time. They met with Burroughs Wellcome, the company that made it, a week before, and they warned that if they didn't lower the price, they were going to demonstrate at the stock exchange, and they were met with a stone wall. What they didn't tell them was that they would be going inside the New York Stock Exchange. They had both a demonstration outside and sent 7 people inside. Those people chained themselves to the VIP balcony. They dropped a banner reading "Sell Welcome." 2 of them stayed on the floor and had hidden cameras. So before anyone knew what was happening, they had dropped the banner. 2 people took a photo. They immediately left the building in the commotion and sent it to media and news outlets. The action was over before anyone knew what had happened inside. the outside action continued on the street. And 4 days later, Borough's Welcome dropped the price of AZT 20% to $6,400 a year. It's something. And this is probably when I was reading about some of these actions, this seemed to be like the quickest response to an immediate action. And I think it's really just because of the media technique of sending the photos. Very savvy. Next is Stop the Church. Okay, so December 10th, 1989. This is probably the most controversial of their actions, but some say it was the most effective. The goal was to confront the Catholic Church, particularly using the face of Cardinal O'Connor as their opposition. The Catholic Church in general and Cardinal O'Connor specifically were opposed to efforts at public education or sex education in public schools, condom distribution, and inclusion of queer people and people of color in classroom curricula, which sounds awfully familiar, as well as opposition to abortion and needle exchange and clean needles, or distribution of clean needles, sorry. And this was an example of multiple pronged action. So there was one plan for action, but what ended up happening was people felt moved to do their own things, and it kind of turned into something more. As I said, it's probably the most controversial. They had a plan for an outside rally on the street and a silent demonstration inside. We're going to watch some footage, and you'll find out that that is not what happened. So, whenever you're ready, Columbo.
At that point, any administration in New York had to pay attention to the Catholic Church. It was almost as if everyone was a Catholic. This is not about people's right to practice their religion individually. This is about an institution that is spending millions of dollars a year to make sure that we do not live.
Cardinal O'Connor made an amazing series of statements which can be summarized in 4 words, and this is not an exaggeration. Let them get AIDS.
The history of hate phone calls or death threats to ACT UP, we've gotten very, very few. It's usually like once every 6 months. But just to show you how daring this action is, our death threats are now running a couple a day.
I'm going to advocate getting into that church to offend parishioners, to offend the church.
There was a lot of concern as to whether or not it was really appropriate for us to do a demonstration at the church.
What I care about is making sure that David Dinkins doesn't listen to him, the city council doesn't listen to him, the Board of Education doesn't listen to him, and that he loses his political power in the city. And therefore, I don't think it's so crucial to confront him inside or the parishioners.
The Catholic Church gives sermons, collects money for the right to life. The church is a political institution.
Yeah, this is a very good opportunity for us to get out our printed information in the form of a false St. Patrick's Cathedral program. We do not challenge anybody's right to worship. So that's right up front. But then it goes on basically with our complaints. It's our fact sheet. The strongest thing we can do is something in silence. A die-in, a mass-in die-in that occurs 2 minutes after he opens up his mouth, up along the central nave and the portion right before the altar. Okay? We want to deflect attention away from the pulpit.
We must put out the message that we are the ones who are fighting for people's lives, and they are the murderers.
Stop the church! Stop the church! Stop the church! Stop the church! Streets! Take the 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 streets!
Safe sex is good morality. Cardinal O'Connor, face reality. Safe sex is good morality. Cardinal O'Connor, face reality.
Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS!
Find out why we're here today. Safe sex information and a free condom.
There were always overlaps between the women's health movement in the late 80s and ACTUP because the principles are the same. It's about respect of your body, control of your body, health of your body, rights of your body.
My name's Starlee Myron, and I'm with WHAM, Women's Health Action and Mobilization. And we've co-sponsored this demonstration today with ACTUP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, because the Cardinal has put out a joint attack on women's rights and reproductive freedom and people with AIDS simultaneously. I mean, AIDS is the #1 killer of women in New York City, so if O'Connor goes out and says, don't use condom, considering the population that really listens to him, that's going to be the death of thousands of women.
Our kids, our adolescents are dying of AIDS as well, and we're trying to teach them safe sex, and O'Connor is saying, no, you can't do that.
This is Jesus Christ. I'm in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral on Sunday. We're here reporting on a major AIDS activist and abortion rights activist demonstration, which will be taking place here all morning. Inside, Cardinal O'Connor is busy spreading his lies and rumors about the position of lesbians and gays. We're here to say we want to go to heaven too.
On that day, the root of Jesse, set up as a signal to all the nations, the Gentiles shall seek out, for his dwelling shall be glorious. This is the word of the Lord.
He then told them what was going to happen, that did happen, and out they went into this period of waiting.
I'm Sarah Shulman. I was sitting in a pew and I watched the die-in, which I think was pretty effective. But when people from ACTUP started standing on pews and screaming, it really alienated the people who were praying. I saw people get very angry and upset. I think they felt really violated by that. Although the die-in, I think, was much more effective because it was silent.
I thought it was one of the best things ACTUP ever did. And there are loads of people who think it was terrible, okay? And they blame it for 100 things that it didn't, from my point of view, was not to be blamed for. The number of people inside was not what got the church scared. What got the church scared was that there were 7,000 people outside. That was the biggest ever picket demonstration we had. And the Catholic Church in New York had never had that many people to say publicly, you are killing people. Your policies, not your religion, your policies and your money, okay, are killing people.
We said for years in ACT UP that our job was not to be liked, that we were not doing what we were doing to get the public to like us. We were doing what we were doing to accomplish something about particular issues. And I think we did that enormously successfully. And we weren't liked, but we forced people to pay attention and forced change, I think, much quicker than it would have happened.
The Catholic Church has never in New York rebounded from that action. Never. No matter what. Even though they're very strong still. They have never had the same profile.
I remember going to the meeting after it. Everybody was terrified after it because it had been in the paper and every editorial page in town had dumped on us and people were scared. And I remember saying, are you crazy? Are you crazy? They're afraid of us now. That's the best thing that could ever have happened to us. And it was true.
Gabby sent a message saying that their internet dropped, so I don't know if they've come back or not, but
I don't think so. Oh, yes.
oh, okay.
I did make it back. It took a while though.
Okay. So at the end there, that was Larry Kramer speaking. If I'm going to kind of, I don't want to really gloss over this because I think it's really important, but I'm not going to read slides on this. I'm just going to kind of summarize. The next thing I thought was really interesting was their needle exchange, which was 2 years of civil disobedience from 1988 to 1990. And the culminating action, to, which sort of, it was just a, I don't know, calling it an action, it was really just the goal was to force a test case. So it wasn't really like the same type of thing as, you know, they can't force the police to arrest someone. So they have to kind of make a situation. So it's not really one culminating action, but it took a while. I don't know. Anyways, sorry. So they would distribute bags to clean equipment for drug users, and they also ran a needle exchange, which was illegal. So 10 syringes someone would give, and they would give 12, which you know, was kind of like the most that they could do at the time. If you asked most of the people, I think they would say that they wanted to do more. And sometimes they would work along drug dealers and actually be where the dealer was to have the needle exchange next to that. There was a test case in Delaware, which set a precedent for a needle exchange there. And in 1990, March 6th, there was a forced case, and that led to a trial, and eventually a verdict was reached that it was medically necessary as a service. So that set the precedent for New York, which I think is very significant, and probably one of the things that doesn't get discussed as much with their actions. So I wanted to bring it up. Storming the NIH and changing the CDC definition of AIDS. This is the action to change the definition of AIDS was a longer term action. There were problems with professionals not realizing that women had separate epidemiological patterns and healthcare that from what men needed. And there were also problems with people in power refusing to speak to women and to integrate their needs into their programs. So there were also problems which included, or with who was included in the drug trials and the speed and efficiency. If you remember back to the first action, we talked about the Wall Street action. These are things that keep coming up. And so you can pinpoint like one action, but they're really like as a movement working towards these goals. So it's little steps each time, kind of. I'd like to watch a little bit of footage. We'll see what we have time for. But first, we're Storm the NIH.
You know, people were looking at the ACTG, the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, and wanted to be part of the decision-making process around clinical trials. Who were in the studies? That we wanted that information, and that's what they didn't want to give us. That they felt was proprietary. How many women are in the studies? How many people of color are in the studies? And we really wanted to look at demographics.
There was a whole lot of push about just sort of practical how trials should be done. That really makes them more accessible to people with HIV. That happened between '89 and '92. It didn't all happen because of ACT UP, but ACT UP played a huge part in making that happen. This is the start of something that should have happened 10 years ago at the start of the AIDS epidemic. And it's something that really did start in 1988 when we took over the FDA. And after 7 years in which the FDA had released one drug, in the last 2 years they've released 4 drugs, and they've released 4 other drugs on expanded access. We have to break down the cult of the expert in every area of this society. The people with AIDS are the experts in this disease.
We want them to stop the secret meetings and to open meetings to people with AIDS and their advocates and to all people who are interested, including the press. And we want people from the affected communities to have voting power and speaking power, because they're not going to get anywhere against this until they're actively dealing with the people who are most affected by the disease.
This is a story of a coalition. My interpretation, my rendition of ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, the NIH on its final hour. Can you say it with me? Storm the NIH. Let's go. Storm the NIH. This is war. For the sick. For the poor. ACT UP. Fight back. Fight AIDS.
Oh, warning, there is some air horn.
Basically, what we're doing is blasting the horns every 12 minutes to remind people that statistically right now, every 12 minutes, someone in America is dying from AIDS.
We're talking about the fact that they don't allow people of color into their trials. We're talking about the fact that they don't care about women, they don't care about children, and that their trials are inefficient, dysfunctional, and we're here to let them know that we're not going to tolerate it anymore.
NIH, mira, Latinos tienen SIDA. NIH, mira, Latinos tienen SIDA. With AIDS under attack, what do we do? ACT UP, fight back. People of color under attack, what do we do? ACT UP, fight back. Drug trials for women. Drug trials for women. Drug trials for women. Drug trials for women.
anymore. I have a home now, but about 10 months ago, I was still homeless. Many people who are here today are still homeless right now. One thing I can tell you about the NIA, they don't have any homeless people in their trials, and they don't have trials for people who are drug users.
NIH scientists need to work with activists. NIH scientists need to work with activists. NIH scientists need to work with activists.
It's time for an end to secrecy in science. It's a time to an end for conflicts of interest. It's time to an end to medical apartheid. It's time to an end to research driven by the search for a Nobel Prize, prestigious journal articles, and trips to scientific conferences in Palm Springs.
It has to happen over and over and over again. The actual science.
Okay, and then if you just skip ahead, actually, it'll be easier. 58, 38, something around there. Closer you can get. It's fine.
The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, definition of AIDS was linchpin in many ways.
The definition had been developed through an observational, systematized collection of diseases that were being seen in gay men alone.
An AIDS diagnosis requires the presence of HIV and then 2 or 3 of these other illnesses, since it's a syndrome. Here is these women that were HIV positive, but were not getting sick in the same ways that gay men were. They had other illnesses present with their HIV.
If you got an AIDS case definition, you were entitled to benefits, Social Security disability benefits. And without that AIDS case definition, you didn't have that. And it could literally mean the difference between life and death.
Count the women, get to work! Count the women, get to work! Count the women, get to work! Count the women, get to work!
So we came up with this plan. Don't let up on them. Let them be hit from the healthcare establishment, litigation, activists, scientists. Beat them until they yield. So campaign-style organizing.
It started out by us doing this Women in AIDS teach-in, which I loved about ACTUP, which people don't even talk about, the teach-ins, which were just educating ourselves about issues. And then like creating booklets. And the handbook that we created for the Women in AIDS teach-in went all around the world.
CDC, can't you see? Lesbians get HIV! CDC, can't you see? Lesbians get HIV! Women die! CDC, tell us why! You said healthcare is the right! Count women! Healthcare is the right! Healthcare is the right! Count women! Healthcare is right! Healthcare is right! The CDC is killing me! Redefine AIDS! The CDC is killing me! Redefine AIDS! We die, they do nothing! 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 We die, they do nothing!
Simultaneous to that, Terry McGovern at the HIV Law Center was pursuing litigation with Social Security Administration to get them to change how they were, what definition they were using.
And you can't sue the CDC. You know, they don't give away the money. They do these definitional things in terms of benefits programs. So I had to figure out a legal strategy to get at the benefits programs for using the CDC definition, which wasn't a fair definition. This was hugely important to get that definition expanded for women and also for low-income people. I mean, the original AIDS definition was not looking at the concept of converging epidemics. So it wasn't just women. It was lots and lots of poor people if you had to pick a denominator. I filed the class action and then got on a bus to go to Washington, and we together planned this big women's demonstration in front of Health and Human Services.
How many women have to die? Or you say they qualify? How many women have to die? Or you say we qualify? How many women have to die? Or you say they qualify?
I'm Phyllis Sharp from New York. I'm also a plaintiff in this lawsuit against the Social Security, charging them with
I highly recommend if you get a chance to check out the full documentary, but we'll pause it there for now. Just to wrap up that action, after the 4-year campaign, the CDC definition was changed so women could qualify for benefits and become models for the development of new medications. So that was another long-term action with some success at the end. I'm gonna go over our time just a little bit because I do want to talk and show a little bit of the ASHES action, and I won't say much because I think it's going to speak for itself. But this is an example of sort of an extension of a political funeral, having a funeral or funeral action in the public, so that sort of people can't ignore it, and it's sort of puts a face to what's happening.
Last April, my lover Warren died, and I was going to send his ashes to George Bush with a protest letter. And I talked with friends from New York who I felt like that was going to be real private, like no one would know about it. And they suggested bringing it to the floor of ACT UP. They said they would personally support it. So they said, when you're in New York, why don't you bring it to the group?
A lot of us agreed that we wanted to show the truth, of the unvarnished truth. Don't pretty this up in any way. What has come out of this epidemic? It's ashes, it's bone chips.
Michael. 150,000 dead! Where was George? 150,000 dead! Where was George?
My name is Eric Sawyer, and I scattered the ashes of
So, I think one thing that's important to say is there's a lot of things that happened that I just couldn't cover. So, if you wanted to learn more about some of these things, some of the techniques that were used, the documentary is a great place to look. this book, Let the Record Show by Sarah Schulman. I think I just wanted to highlight the actions that I did because I thought that they were very powerful, and whether or not they could be examples of things that activist groups might do today or not. I'm not sure if there's direct crossover, but I just thought it's important to sort of look at their impact. So with that said, some of the impacts of ACT UP, there was more true representation of people with AIDS in the public view. Some major victories stemming from changing the definition of AIDS to include women and conditions affecting them. Access to benefits, research, medication, and Sarah Schulman writes, because every drug that was developed in America that included women of color in clinical trials became a drug that is still used internationally to treat women with HIV. So I think that cannot be understated, that impact. There was also a bit of weakening of the FDA process, which at the time was a good thing. Some have argued that the approval process today should be more rigorous because it was eroded a little bit too much. So pluses and minuses with that, we have to balance that. ACT UP today, they still use the same thing that I read at the beginning. They're a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis. We meet government officials, we distribute the latest medical information, we protest and demonstrate, we are not silent. And recent actions have included demonstrations protesting the arming of Israel by the US, email blasts during Pride to organizations in favor of divesting from Israel, a march to Trump Tower for World AIDS Day, which I believe was last year, and others. But this is an ongoing crisis and they're still active, and who knows what sort of actions they will take. I think I'll leave it there, but some more information for those that might want it. And I guess if we want to have any feedback or thoughts, we can do that now, but no pressure. It's a very hard topic, so thank you for everyone. You know,
Can I interject
Yes.
with a really nerdy comment? So Peter and I talked about this. The needle exchange thing is actually really cool because it's like a harm reduction strategy, which is one of the most like effective intervention methods we have for like reducing drug overdoses. And yet it is still really unpopular in the United States as like an intervention. And so the fact that they pushed for the test case is really cool, that they were like the first to instigate it.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly effective in other countries to help with the spread of disease and with drug overdosing and stuff like that. But
I was thinking when you were talking about that, like, is it because of their test case that there are any needle exchange harm reduction programs in the United States and beyond?
I don't know actually if it because there were other chapters in like Chicago, San Francisco, other things. I think they were the main ones pushing for it, and they definitely got the test case in New York.
And I'm sure that
But
influenced.
it's probably influenced a lot. Yeah,
it's very impressive. I've always really loved the notion of a die-in as a protest. And it was fascinating to see the different things that happened at the church protest, which, you know, a very interesting microcosm of the debate between how stuff should work in terms of protest and how far do you want to go to offend people, how far do you want to go to keep friends happy, keep allies potentially without, you know, alienating anyone. That was a fascinating
I think
bit of
that
history.
it's if you're doing a die-in, it's important to like die where it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you're in a church and you like die in a pew in silence, like that doesn't really. It's like not interrupting
Yeah,
anything.
that's just
Like
where
how
people
effective
sit,
is
bro.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about that for me was it's also a good case, like a good example of how they didn't stop people from doing what they felt they needed to do. So like some people yelled, blew whistles, made noise, and they didn't stop them.
Yeah.
Because the whole point was everyone, it's kind of like everyone's opinion or action is valid. They might not, not everyone might go along with it, but they wouldn't stop you. So I thought that was kind of powerful. Yeah.
It's so eerie, the overlap with some of the themes that we're experiencing in the world today. And that is unsettling and sad.
They've laid a lot of groundwork for things that make it possible for us to survive today. So some gratitude for that.
Significant, and they pretty much wrote the handbook, so we can just pick up where they left off.
Absolutely. I want to read that.
Yeah, definitely. The beginning, the introduction, it's actually set up as like a sort of a guide to it is. Where is it? It's how to make change. So it's sort of like a little mini handbook of like what was effective and just how to handle different situations and stuff. So even if you don't read the whole thing, the intro is great.
Awesome. And maybe we should watch that whole documentary sometime at movie night. Is it like a regular length of a movie?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's an hour and 20 minutes.
Great. We can definitely do that and get the whole story.
That'd be good.
Very interesting clips and everything that you shared with us. So thank you. Thank you for that. Very well presented, Peter.
Thank you.
Work.
I appreciate that.
Did Gabby have any thoughts or questions?
I have a lot of them, but there are too many of them to actually express at the moment.
Fair.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, and because I'm old, I remember some of it, so it's more emotional too.
Yeah. It adds a lot of resonance to like two major like cultural artifacts, one of which is somewhat more silly than the other, but like when I first saw Rent, the part where they all get up and chant "Act Up, Stop AIDS" in the middle of like the big silly the first act finale, like I was like, that seems important, but I don't get it, and like that's extremely significant. And then the other one being Angels in America, which there was something in there that I forget right now, but it was like pulled from reality into Angels in America. And certainly all the talk about AZT and the significance of it as a life-saving drug and the have and have not situation with it in both of those pieces of art is very interesting to look back on and think about.
Okay.